Now we're going to turn to the discussion part of our afternoon together. And since we started about 4:10, I'd say we have about 20 to 25 minutes for conversation. The way I'm going to proceed is to speak to His Holiness first with a question and then ask the panelists to reflect. David Rosen spoke of the angels that don't need to be named because we already know that they're angels. Rajmohan Gandhi spoke of the chariots of valor that allow us to look squarely at our own tradition. Joan Chittister spoke of how we are called to compunction and a full examination of the worst of what we are doing. And Abdullahi Ahmed An-Na'im spoke about how we need to take charge personally. One of the biggest challenges, I think, for the 21st century in interreligious dialogue is how hard it is for each of us to criticize publicly our own tradition, even though we are called to examine and look in our own hearts. And so I'd like to ask His Holiness and then each of you to give us a narrative of a moment in your peace-building life when you had to criticize publicly your own tradition, and how you moved into the pain of that moment as well as beyond it, and what social change might it have produced.
Public level tolia munjin cheche and di ko mateo de yorba and dine di munjin chebe kenge and kompaya get dumbu che tuya de kol konja kayunas
susu mandamre che
na kada na jukta na but
I have to think.
What do you say?
I need to think. Some
one thing, after we came to India, our Christian brothers, sisters, heavily involved in the social service, in the field of education and the field of health. Traditionally, Buddhist monks, nuns, I think very, very little that kind of sort of involvement. So many years ago, I think mid-60s, 1960s, I have the opportunity to visit Thailand, and when I met the Thai monks,
no, patriarch, the supreme patriarch,
supreme leader, I raised this question. We Buddhist monks, nuns, they take very little sort of involvement in the service to the society, whereas Christian brothers, sisters, heavily involved. Now we should take more involvement, active role. And meantime, many occasions I express to Tibetan Buddhist monks, nuns, now we should take more sort of active role in these fields. That I feel one of the drawback, lacking. Then, of course, I think the other speakers mentioned there some problem or some unhappy sort of event among ourselves there, but these mainly the individual. I usually describe mischievous people. So that among the Hindus, among the Christian, among the Muslim, among the Buddhists, among the Jews, everywhere, some mischievous people always there. So particularly the September 11th event, you see, happened. that tragedies happened. So just 1 year after that event, I was in Washington. So one memorial sort of service in the National Cathedral, Washington. I was there. I expressed there, since then, there is some kind of impression that Islam is something a little bit militant. I told there, that is totally wrong. Due to few mischievous Muslims' behavior, and generalize whole Islam is something negative. It's unfair, totally wrong. So I mentioned some mischievous people among all different traditions of the follower. So among Tibetan also some mischievous people there. So that we can't blame due to these mischievous people of today. Action and whole Buddhism is something negative. You can't say. There are some of those Hindus, you see, who involved in the abolishing Haza.
The mosque.
So some are a bit militant. But that cannot generalize whole Hinduism is something like that. No, certainly not. So that's my view. Otherwise, I don't know what is lacking there. I don't know.
Thank you. That's okay. Thank you. Very helpful.
Now, Titon the lecture Carlin. The Chumba and Pendo research. Came to this.
So,
now, Chebena, now.
Menzisha, Repena, the Jumde, doing wishes, champagne to Viadalia, doing wishes Mudua, Sansingi Jimba, Nyambarmawa. Then it turned Joe, turned Tumbas in Militia, social Chawaramato, social Machina, and Militia.
So, this recognition of what shortcomings there are within the followers of one's own tradition is an important step. Because, for example, in Buddhism, there is a practice of what is called the 4 factors of assisting others, guiding others. And these include initially giving material aid when necessary, and then using eloquent speech so that it is pleasant to the other. And the third is to give instructions, spiritual instructions. And the fourth, which is the important point, is to live that in your own, by your own example.
Thank you.
Of course, Laurie's question is apt. When my grandfather Gandhi, after arriving in India, having spent 20 years in South Africa, tried to engage India and change India, and he attacked untouchability. He was very fiercely attacked. People said, "You're not a Hindu, you are secretly a Christian." But he continued with his work. And then when he, on the Hindu-Muslim issue, he said that whatever might be the mistakes of the Muslims, we Hindus should also look at our own mistakes. He was again very strongly attacked. And as everybody knows, some people killed him because they thought he was not aggressive enough as a Hindu and too soft to the Muslims. But he proceeded on the assumption, which I think is a valid assumption, that the vast majority of the Hindu people were with him and not with the angry and the extremists among the Hindus. And this has been my experience too. I too have tried, all of us, we judge ourselves by our ideals and the other side by its deeds. And even though some Hindus have been critical of my throwing a searchlight at where Hindu society might have fallen short, the vast majority of the Hindus I've run into are very much on my side. And this is what I've found in one tradition after another.
Did you all notice how long it took the men to think?
How long it took the men to think.
Now, if you're a woman, you don't have to strain as hard to think about anything like that in any tradition. Fact of the matter is, I have spent my life tracing unsound and negative ideas about women, confronting them with a holy, sound, and graced theology that belies them, but is continuously, systematically, and institutionally denied on all levels. Now, it's not painful to do it, but it's painful to see it ignored. But I go on anyway because John 23rd said, "Evil succeeds because the good do nothing." And Toffler said, "If we do not shape the future, we shall be compelled to endure it."
Well, I'm obviously a very thick male. I find that question really challenging. And I think what I'm also very conscious of it in, I think what is a very profound and important question, the very inspiring words we heard from Professor An-Na'im before. Because the question, I think, requires us, if we are going to address it with integrity, to separate between the tradition and the followers of a tradition. Now, I think there's a lot to criticize within my tradition, and I don't think you have enough time to be able to spend with me in order to hear what I have to criticize within my tradition. I'm happy to say that it is an evolving tradition, and even though I'm an Orthodox rabbi, I'm happy to say that contrary to many misconceptions, Orthodox Judaism is also a tradition within a process of evolution. I'm very much reminded of my colleague Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg's comments saying, "I don't care what denomination you are as long as you're ashamed of it." But of course, as you've heard from the answers, inevitably the question becomes, what do we criticize about our co-religionists? Or do what we criticize in our community? And especially when today I run around the world playing ambassador for Judaism, but once upon a time I had a community and before that a congregation. And probably to follow on from Dr. Patton's question about how it might have affected me, I suppose my first and in a way most seminal conflict with my own community was when I was rabbi in South Africa. I'm very proud of the fact that I was expelled from South Africa in 1979. But I didn't tell you that for applause. Thank you very much. But that wasn't the reason I told you that. It was to tell you that while I had Desmond Tutu's predecessor, the Dean Archbishop in Cape Town, Ted King, very kindly referred to the Jews as the true Christians of South Africa, and by that he meant to say that the record of the Jews under apartheid was better than most. It was still pretty abysmal. Inevitably, people, and it's very easy for us to stand in judgment. It's all easy to be armchair critics. But when you're in a situation that is morally problematic, and you're part of that society, and even if you didn't elect the government, nevertheless, inevitably, you bear some responsibility for it, it's very difficult to assume a prophetic position. And in South Africa at that time, I would say and here now I'm not talking just of adherents, I'm talking above all of my colleagues, I would say that the rabbis failed their duty of speaking truth to power. And they weren't worse than anybody else, but they could have been a lot better. And they certainly should have been a lot better in terms of our prophetic tradition. And I remember very well on the eve of the elections, I had a very large congregation. It was actually a membership of 10,000. I had 1,500 in synagogue on a Sabbath and was the envy of the local politicians and exploited it a little bit. And I remember on the eve of elections telling my congregation that anyone that supports the policies of the powers that be is a traitor to their prophetic heritage. And some people walked out of the congregation. And I was always happier if people walked out of sermons rather than falling asleep. You know? And so that was actually those moments facing apartheid, and it had certain consequences, death threats, and then my phone was tapped and all such other events, and it was also the period of the Soweto riots, and we got together as members of different religion to actually stand against the bulldozers that were demolishing the squatter camps and places like that. And that was when I realized that was really the beginning of my interfaith journey. So in a way, my sense of the inadequacy within my community, feeling that it wasn't really living up to its prophetic heritage, was what pushed me into seeking out other different religious communities for cooperation. And in a way, I suppose I have to give thanks to that tension for the vocation of which I'm now a part and how it's opened up. But it also illuminated me to some things of which I was extremely naive and unaware. I founded the Interfaith Forum in South Africa, which was a council of Christians, Muslims, and Jews. And I'd hawked my wares around to the different religious denominations saying, Father, Pastor, Reverend, Sheikh, the things that bring us together are so much more important than the things that keep us apart. And they'd all said yes and agreed to be part of this Interfaith Forum. But I knew in the South African context, if I didn't involve the Dutch Reformed Church, then it would be of little effect. The Dutch Reformed Church represented the power base. In fact, it was often referred to as the nationalist party at prayer. And so I heard of a dominee, a Dutch Reformed minister, downtown Cape Town, who was having dialogue with Catholics. Now, you might not think that's a big deal, but anybody who is familiar with the demonology of the Dutch Reformed Church at the time will know that there were two great threats. One was the zwart gevaar, the black danger, and the other was the Romische gevaar, the Catholic danger. So I thought, if this guy is having dialogue with Catholics, well, maybe he'll meet with a Jew. How naive could I have been? And so I make an appointment, and I go down and I meet with him. At least he was kind enough to receive me. And I said to him, my opening gambit that had worked so well, Dominie, the things that bring us together are so much more important than the things that keep us apart. And to my surprise, this was his reply, and I have to do it with a South African accent. He said to me, "No, Rabbi, I have to tell you the truth, you are wrong. The most important thing in my life keeps us apart, my belief in Jesus as my personal Savior. You do not share that, Rabbi, therefore I have to tell you the truth, you are going to burn in hell. And it is my duty as a good Christian to save you." And I said something then which I don't know whether I really believed at the time, but I certainly believe it now. I said to him, "Well, thank you, Dominie, for your honesty. I appreciate it. I would still like you to come along to our interfaith meetings, because I think it's important for me to understand you. And I'm going to give you an opportunity. You can come along. I'll give you an opportunity to try and convert me. Come along. Try your best. But I think it's really important that I understand you and that you understand me." And he came along to these meetings, and if I could mix my metaphors, he became less pontificatory. And it was actually a very important lesson for me. It was a very instructive lesson, in which I learned that there are certain principles in life for which you have to show your integrity of where you should remain steadfast. But if you make every issue out of a principle, then in the end you don't really have real principles. And need to be flexible and accept those sometimes that people have very strong opinions and they're sincerely held, but that the power of the human encounter can impact on them and change them and have an ennobling and humanizing effect. That for me was the lesson, and that's the lesson of my life. I believe passionately. People say, why dialogue? Of course, there has to be more than dialogue. As my colleagues have called, we have to act. There are issues of justice. There are issues of righteousness. There are issues of discrimination and persecution of which we have to act, of course. But dialogue is a powerful thing in itself. It has within it this profound divine energy that can change all of us. And that, I think, is a very beautiful thing, and that's a great privilege for me to be able to be engaged in dialogue.
Again, I'm privileged to just say I agree with all that. But I'm sure that Professor Patton would not let me get away with that one. So what I would like to bring just simply a dimension of the human. Because to me, I'm 60 years old now. I have been with my teacher for 20 years, and since his death for 20 years, still I feel with him. And for the 40 years of my life, I have come a long way in understanding how basically human I am. And it may look or sound a bit strange. Obviously, we are human. But by that I mean that the human is a self-determining human, is a moral agent. And it is an agency that we can forfeit, but we can never abdicate. Meaning that we are responsible for our human moral choice, whether we make it or fail to make it, and someone else makes it for us. For me, the Muslim community is global now, and often the sense of perspective and the sense of historical perspective, many Muslims would sort of take the apologetic line of saying we had the grand Islamic civilization for 1,000 years. And that's apologetic and irresponsible. Because the true tradition is a living tradition. We cannot take credit for the achievements of our forefathers and foremothers. We take responsibility for our generation and what I call our ability to celebrate heresy. Heresy is vitally important for the life of every tradition. The possibility of belief itself presupposes the possibility of disbelief. And for me, in my life, human rights have come to symbolize the possibility of heresy, which is the possibility of belief, which is the possibility of moral agency at the core of my humanity. That is, I think, what I would like to bring to our table.